Hello. Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Julien Gerteau, and well, you might know me in the demo scene as Zavie of the group Ctrl-Alt-Test, and I'm going to talk about light again. When I started to learn OpenGL back then, the very first program I did looked probably something like this. Classic spinning cube. But, well, the truth is this screenshot is from our first demo, which, well, it managed to win the PC 64K intro competition at Evoke. We even got nominated to a Scene.org award, so that made us even more happy. And, well, I guess you don't know what to make it a demo about a spinning cube after all. Anyway, after I had my cube spinning on my screen, when I was learning how to add light to it. So the very first time I had light in my program, it probably looked something like this, which means it looked, well, terribly ugly. And so did my next couple of attempts, which was frustrating. I mean, no matter how I changed the parameters, it would look every time equally ugly. Well, it would look differently ugly. But, well, I was puzzled. I mean, you want to learn how to use light, so usually you go on Google and you say, okay, OpenGL or DirectX, if that's your API, lighting, how to, and you end up on some tutorials, and this tutorials goes like, yeah, lighting, it's easy. You do this, you do that, and ta-da, you got light. So you look at it. It looks, well, okay, fairly easy, fair enough. So you take your existing project, you do this, you do that, and ta-da, you got crap. So why is that? Well, as I much later understood, the reason it looks so bad is, well, there were two reasons. The first one, and most obvious one, was that I didn't understand the lighting model used by OpenGL. You have all these parameters all over the place. For every single light, you have, say, the ambient, the diffuse, the specular, and, well, you have the position, and if you have a spotlight, you have even more parameters, and then you have all the materials, and again, you have the ambient, the diffuse, the specular, and then you have the shininess. And you have the general parameters, and why would you have alpha in the color of light? So you have all these parameters, and I didn't know what values I should give to them to make it look good. And here lies the second reason, which is that I didn't really have a goal. I didn't clearly have something I wanted to do. I wasn't thinking in terms of, I want this kind of light, I want this scene to look this way, or this kind of colors. But rather, okay, I have something on my screen, let's just add light to it so it looks better. Big mistake. Big mistake, and a pretty common one. I know I've done it several times myself. Basically, you have something on your screen, and you want your something to look better, so you think, oh, I know, I'm going to use this technique everybody is talking about. And then you just earned yourself a new problem, because this technique not only requires to be implemented, but you need to learn how to use it, and it comes with its requirements in terms of fine-tuning. Meanwhile, your something on your screen doesn't look any better, and quite possibly the opposite. And worse, you may not even be aware of it, because, well, let's face it, it's a new technique, it looks cool, it looks fancy, so you're happy about it, and that blinds you from the fact it also looks ugly. So bottom line is that throwing a new technique at whatever you're doing is not going to make it any better. At the end of the day, what really matters is the artwork, it's what you're trying to create, it's not the technique. And don't misunderstand me here. I don't try to build technique here. I mean, we're the demo scene. We care a good deal about technique. Technique is fun. It's cool to implement and to try out. But the thing is that nowadays, demos are expected to be solid on the artistic side. And I think we should expect even more from it. Even if you're doing a pure 100% tech demo, I think you should still try to use some artwork that not only fits the technique you're trying to showcase, but some artwork that really profits from it, that really shines with it. So from there, the question becomes, what do we want to do on the art side, and what can we do on the technical side? And this is a tough question because it might be two different people answering the two different questions, so you need to communicate between the two. So this talk is not going to be technical. So on the technical side, well, like I said, you have different techniques. Basically, these techniques are going to change in terms of quality, how good they look. They are going to change in terms of performance, in terms of how hard they are to implement, how hard they are to use. Like if you have a powerful technique, you give it to your artist, and you have 100 parameters, and your artist is not going to be happy about it. And they're going to change in terms of when they work and when they do not work. So I'm not going to list or compare any technique here, and I'm just going to jump on the artistic side. And especially, I'm going to talk about light, because the point I want to make today is that light is an extremely powerful tool when it comes to design. So what can we do with light? Well, in demos, maybe the most popular use is Hypnoglow. I mean, it looks cool. Well, in general, I mean, the aesthetics. Light looks good. Another very usual use in the demo scene is synchronizing the lights to the music. So basically making a bound between the image and the sound. But what else can we do, really, from the basics? Wow, this. So you can use light for the, say, to set some emotions, for example, to set a dramatic effect or a very soothing one, or making something look happy or sad. Well, basically conveying emotions. You can more basically use light to convey any kind of information. Light is going to convey information about volumes, about distances, about texture and materials, or you can even convey ideas about where the place is, or what time of day it is, or what temperature it is. So really give information to your viewer. Or on the opposite, you can use light to remove information if you want to concentrate on something specific, if you want to make your image simpler to understand to your viewer. You can use light to focus on specific things. If you carefully lit things or keep them in the shadow, you can draw attention and making really be outstanding from your image. You can use light to create opposition. You can use light to emphasize contrast, emphasize difference, or make a frame within your frame, or change the shape of your frame. You can have your wall composition relying on light. Then, well, basically, there are many things you can do with the light, and you can be really creative about it. I like this shot a lot. Here, the light is used to convey a complete idea. I mean, by using this light, the guy is casting a shadow on the wall, and this shadow is reminding you of a famous tale, and that brings back all the meaning to the shot. I mean, if you didn't have the shadow, it would just be another jump shot. But because of the shadow, the shot really gets all its meaning. So you can really be creative and try to surprise your audience and do unexpected things with the light. Another use of light you can do is, on purpose, not to use it, not have any light. This is a screenshot from a Chromosphere, from a group I'm not going to name today. They're not using any light either. They have all these empty shading, sort of. And this makes perfect sense with regard to the demo. The way I understand it, Chromosphere is sort of an allegory of the creation of sight within the eye. And when you think of it, if this is the meaning, then the information conveyed by light has not been processed yet, because there is no sight yet. So you don't have colors, you don't have light, and this makes perfect sense. Or maybe they just thought this kind of shading was looking cool. But anyway, it makes sense with regard to the story, so it really supports it in this way. Another demo I want to talk about is this classic. So it's the all-time top on Poet. This is Debris from Saarbrücken. 2007.
So this, as far as I understand, this demo is making two uses of light. The first one, it's using light as a way of conveying the intensity. Like you have a story growing up and with a climax at the end, and the light is conveying the intensity. But at the beginning, they're just setting up the story, they're presenting you the scene, so you have very little intensity. Maybe a little bit of it, but like you have this light which is very soft, and you don't have much contrast. And the demo is using stencil shadowing, and it's kind of CPU intensive, so you have this option of disabling shadows. And that's interesting because you can then compare with and without shadows. And well, you see that when the cube opens, you don't have this much difference between the shot with and without shadows. So you don't have this much contrast. But if we go to a different scene, if we go to the climax, well, that's a very different story. We have a very different lighting here. You have very bright highlights, very dark shadows that give a lot of contrast. And an interesting thing is, so they're using stencil shadows, and in the info file they say, yeah, we didn't have time to change the pipeline. We're still sticking with it. And shadows were considered already obsolete by the time the demo was out. I mean, nowadays it's all about soft shadows. If you don't have soft shadows, you're kind of has-been. And one of the limitations of the stencil shadowing is you cannot have soft shadows. But in this particular demo, this supposedly limitation of this technique is used as a strength, because you wouldn't have this much intensity if you had soft shadows. Here, the debris are casting shadows on the wall that makes very harsh line, very strong shapes, aggressive shapes. And if we look at the shot again without shadows, well, we lost a lot of intensity. I mean, it still looks intense, but it's certainly not as luminous as this one with all these aggressive shapes. Another use of light in this demo is, for example, this one. When you see this shot, you probably cannot help but looking at the viaduct on the right. And I mean, it's not the demo, it's a still, but you cannot help looking at it. And I would argue, even if it weren't there, you would still be looking at that direction. And why is that? There are a couple of reasons. You have the composition, you have the rule of third, you have the perspective and the vanishing point that drive your sight over there, but you also have the light. If you pay attention, the light source is behind the viaduct, and so it makes a brighter part over there, catching your attention, and you have the shadows. Well, okay, the shadow of the fence is a bit questionable, but anyway, this shadow is making lines pointing toward the viaduct. So all these elements are really driving your attention over there. And if we look at the next shots, you will notice that every time the brightest part of the image is the origin of it. So they're really making the image simpler to understand for you as a viewer. It's a very intense moment, things are happening. So they make the shot simpler to get. And by having this bright part, well, you know where to look at. They ensure you're going to look at the right part, even though it's kind of complicated in the middle of things. So we have two uses of light in this demo. We have light to draw your attention on parts they want you to see, and you have light to convey the intensity of what is happening. So this is, well, a good example in the demo scene. I don't think I've seen many examples making uses of light like this. You have maybe similar things in uncovering statics with light intensity. But so this is the demo scene. Now what could be interesting is looking at what the big guys are doing. And by big guys, I mean Hollywood. So this is the last animation short film by Disney. It was presented last summer, and it was later released to the public in December, and it won an award, an Oscar last February for the best animation short film. So it's really good. If you haven't seen it, I really recommend it to you. It's really fun. The story is about this guy and this woman in some New York in the 40s, and they have sort of a chance encounter, and after that they try to meet again.
Here too, the light is used to draw attention. So for example, in this shot, well, you see the woman immediately. And even though when you look at it, the girl is not this big with regard to the size of the picture, she doesn't have much contrast, but still you see her immediately. And well, that's because you have the building which is very brightly lit, and you have all the windows reflecting light, and you have one window open that makes a little bit of contrast, and you see it immediately. So you have light here used, well, to show you this girl, which wouldn't be salient otherwise. Another use of light is this one. In this part, you have hundreds of paper planes, and they want you to see one in particular. So they use this shaft of light to remove unnecessary information and drive your attention on the one they want you to see. Okay, now a more interesting use of light is the way they lit the guy and the girl. Both are lit differently, and well, I find it really interesting the way they did it. So the guy is lit according to his inner state, the emotion he's experiencing, the events he's going through. For example, at the beginning, we see him at work, and well, he's in a low mood, he's kind of bored, and he's a bit sad because of the girl. So we have the light. We see outside it seems to be some bright weather, but inside the office, the light is very dim. You don't have much contrast. So this is kind of reflecting his state of mind, which it's kind of boring. But in a later shot, even though it's a same place, it's the same office, same seat, and the weather is not supposed to have changed, we have a very different light here, with much more contrast. Why is that? Well, the reason is that he made a decision. He's about to do something really bold, and here you have the light telling you in advance that something is happening, that something intense is happening. And likewise, when you see his boss, at the very same moment, even though the light is very soft on him, the light is much harsher on the boss, which is representing, well, the latent confrontation between the boss-employee relationship. Now, in one of the most intense shots of the film, you see the guy rushing through the traffic, so you have a much harsher light with very strong fall-offs, with very strong shadows, much more contrast. And at the opposite, at some point, the guy is sort of giving up. And what is he doing when he gives up? He's walking from the light into the shadow. So how interesting is that? And okay, I don't want to spoil you the story if you haven't seen it, but this is Disney, so you know two things about Disney. You're going to have a happy ending, and you're going to have the magic of Disney. So what happens when the magic of Disney happens? The guy is literally pulled off from the shadow back into the light. Now, onto the girl. The girl is lit differently again. You have this guy and this girl who are trying to reach each other. And the light on the girl is representing how far apart they are, how unreachable she feels. So the more unreachable she is, the less light she has. And the closer she gets, the more light she has. So back on this shot, the guy is at work, he's at the office, and he noticed the girl in the other building, and what could he possibly do? He's at work, he's supposed to be working, he doesn't even know what her name is. How could he possibly do something about it? So she's in the shadow, showing that she's unreachable. But then he figures out there might be a way to get her attention. So you have just a hint of light on the girl, showing that she might be reachable in a way. Unfortunately, it doesn't manage to get her attention, so the moment she gets out of the room, she gets back into the shadow. Later on, when the girl decides to go on her way to the guy, well, she's completely bathing in the light. And finally, when you see this shot, this is a single shot in the film where she receives the most light. So you don't even need to see the next shot to understand what's happening. That's the moment she finds him. And, well, obviously, when they are together, they both receive light. So that's a really interesting use of light. You have three uses again. Light to draw attention, light to represent an inner state of mind, and light to convey some element of the story, some meaning of the story. Now, what else can we do? In the end, using these elements of light in an image is part of a bigger picture. Here I'm taking an example of a book, The Visual Story, which is about filmmaking and how to use how to use image to support your story. So, for example, when you see a film, when you see a movie, the music usually is going to evolve according to the story. So if you have a sad moment, the music is going to be sad. If you have an intense moment, your sound is going to be more intense. The music is going dramatic or something like that. And the point made by the book is that your image should do the same. Your image should support the story the very same way the music does it. So the author is breaking the image into these basic components. And depending on who you're talking to, maybe those components are going to differ a bit. But the idea remains the same. You have different components of the image, and by carefully choosing these components and making contrast between them, you're going to really manage to have your image supporting your story. So take an example. Have you noticed in animation films how the bad guys are always kind of spiky and the good guys are sort of curvy? And in this specific example in Aladdin, you see the good guys are all made of shades of blue and white, and the bad guy is red and black. So these elements are going to change over the duration of the film. And maybe the most easy to notice one is the color palette. You have, for example, when good things happen, the characters are, say, in a bright, sunny day, and when bad things happen, for example, if someone dies, you have some rain, and if you have a big battle between the good guys and the bad guys, like good and evil, you're going to have a raging storm and with lightnings and everything. So the color palette is going to evolve over the duration of the film, and this is an example from the classic from Spielberg. And you have 1 shot per second, 60 shots per line, so this makes every line a minute worth of film. And you can see how the color changes over the duration of the movie. So the question is, can you guess when the shark is attacking from this image? So now the thing is, you have all these elements, and that's a lot of elements you have to handle. And there are many ways to change these elements. You can change, if it's an actual film, you can change the location, the furniture, the clothes, all these kind of things. So you have a lot of ways to influence them, and that's a bit overwhelming. But an interesting thing is, you might notice you can actually change all these basic image components just by changing the light. So this is, in this shot, this is obviously the bad guy. Like, no doubt, you see it. The shot is kind of, very, very intense, but the mood is very depressing in a way. You have these washed out colors, you have the red shadows, a lot of contrast. But when you think of it, if you didn't have this kind of lighting, if you had, say, I don't know, like a summer sun lighting, maybe this would be a good guy doing some performance. But no, with this lighting, this is a bad guy. So really, by changing the light, depending on if you have a strong or a soft light, you're going to give more or less intensity. Depending on the color of your light, you're going to change the tones of your image. Depending on the shadows you have, you're going to add lines add shapes to your image that are going to create these elements we're talking about. And you can add the rhythm to your image. You can change the composition. All this only by changing light. Even though you have so many elements to choose from, just by changing light, you can affect all of them at the same time. So it's kind of a single component you can have control on. Now you might say, okay, all of this is cool, it sounds great, but this is Hollywood, and we are the demo scene. It's not like we can pull out this kind of stuff. Because, well, the demo scene, we have limitations. There is only this much we can do. And so what limitations do we have? Well, usually people are going to complain that we are limited in terms of people. Demo scene group usually are very limited. You only have a couple of members, and you have only this much free time. So basically, you have only this much manpower, and you have to come up with your own tools, your own engines, and even if you're doing a demo without without doing size coding, you still have to come up with your tool chain, and you always have this choice between writing the tools or writing the actual content. And then you have the real-time limitations, which is something we really enjoy. That's part of the fun of the demo scene, but still, with real-time, you are limited in terms of computing power. So how can we possibly do that in the demo scene? Well, I thought it might be interesting to compare with other media. And when you talk to people doing other stuff than demo scene, say film, actual film or photography, you're going to see that these guys, they have their limitations too. So if they have their limitations, maybe that means we have some strengths we might not even be aware of. So I meant to compare a couple of them in terms of very basic things. So do they have motions? Like, are we talking about media that is about still or about motion? Is it tangible in the sense, are we taking something that exists, or do we have to make it from the ground up? Is it interactive, and how many people are working on it, and is it expensive to do? So a very basic one would be painting, which, well, you don't have motion. It's not tangible because even if you're painting something that exists, you have an empty canvas at the beginning, and you have to do everything by yourself. It's not interactive, at least that I'm aware of. And it's usually a one-man work, and it's pretty low cost. You would only need pens, brushes, paint, and canvas, not expensive. Now, if we compare it to photography, well, first difference, it's actual tangible thing. You're going to take a picture of something that actually exists. So what does this change? First, it's easier. If you want to, say, have a portrait or something, it's easier to take a picture of someone than to actually paint it. But on the other hand, you're going to have limitations in terms of what you can do. You are sort of bound to reality. You cannot do things that don't exist, or you can try to do that, but it's going to require a lot more work to do something abstract or something impossible than it is, well, when you create it from scratch. On the cost, I would say photography is not exactly low cost, it's affordable. It's not expensive, but I mean, anyone nowadays can buy a camera. It's going to be maybe $1,000 and you're done with it. But the thing is, you're going to need to invest every time you buy new equipment. So what does this mean? Well, if you want to experiment with this, you're going to need to pay money for it. Say if you're doing some photo with natural light, and then you want to do some photo with some light setup, well, you're going to need to buy some equipment for the light setup. And this is going to, well, you can do that, of course, but it's not like you're, okay, I would like to do some artificial light shooting today. Well, if you don't have the equipment, you cannot really do that. You need to buy it, and it might cost you a significant amount of money. Now, about film, well, obviously you have motion, and what does this mean? It's going to sound stupid, but this is a motion film. It's going to be much easier to convey motion. I mean, you can still convey motion in a photo or in a painting, but it's going to be a lot more difficult than in a film, and the impression you can do on your audience is going to be very limited. While if you have a motion film with some actual strong motion, you can really make an impression on your audience. It's tangible again. And you have the large team. So the large team part is interesting because usually in the demo scene you say, we can't really do that. We are only this many people. We don't have a large team. Yeah, but these guys with actual large teams, I mean, even for a short film, when you see the credits, is like this long. Well, when you have a large team, you have all sorts of problems that are appearing. You have communication problems. I mean, for example, if you, even in a demo group, you can have a communication problem. You have a very clear idea in your mind of what you want to do. But until you actually create the stuff, it's very difficult to communicate it to someone else. You say, I want to do this, and you have the image clear in your head. But how do you convey this image to the next guy? So imagine when you have a big team, how much harder this gets. And another issue they can have with the big team is the consistency. The more people you have, the less consistency you're going to get because, well, everyone has his own view of the thing, and it's difficult to convey an idea, so everyone is going to interpret it his own way. And, well, for the cost, we're not going to talk about low cost for film. I was asking advice to a filmmaker about, okay, as a filmmaker, what limitations are you facing? And his answer was kind of interesting. He told me that he was sticking to documentary because the sort of films he would like to come up with would cost him too much to afford. So he's sticking to a certain kind of film because the ones he would really like to do, he just cannot afford it. Then CGI film, so animation films. Well, the main difference with film is you have, it's virtual. So what does this mean? Well, on one hand, you can do pretty much anything. You're not bound to reality anymore. And this has interesting consequences. When you see film people and CGI film people, the way they look at each other, they both consider each other crazy. Because, for example, if you want a certain shot in a film, say, and you have a clear image of this shot, it's going to be difficult to come up with. Because, well, if you want something that a certain kind of room, a certain kind of scene, well, either you find it or you make it or you just cannot do it. But on the other hand, you can concentrate on the big picture. If you want a table and a chair, you put a table and a chair and you're done with it. And in the CGI film, you can do anything you want. But if you want a table and a chair, well, you need a 3D artist to build it. You need a 2D artist to make it. And you need a lighting artist to make the stuff. So you can do anything, but you have to concentrate on a much lower level. You have to concentrate down to the pixel level. So that makes film people go like, wow, these guys are completely nuts. And so another interesting media is video game. So I'd say it's kind of close to CGI film, but you have two very important differences. It's interactive. And what does it mean, the interactive part? It means, for example, in a film, if you see that a lot in, say, horror movies. You can have a light setup that changes completely from one shot to another. And the people are not going to notice. And even if they notice, they wouldn't care. So you can put a light here, and within the frame, you don't see the light setup. But if you could go out of the camera, you would see the stuff outside of it. You can do that in a video game. Because in a video game, the guy is moving. You don't have any control or very little control over what the player is doing. So you cannot really stage things. You cannot make things up because it's going to fall apart very quickly. And that means you need very robust techniques. It's one of the difficult parts of video games, for example, when it comes to lighting, that you have limitations. And it's difficult to hide these limitations because you're going to have corner cases that don't work. And it's difficult to have these cases that don't work not show up in the actual game. And, well, another limitation is that video games are real-time. So it means you don't have the same budget in terms of computing than you have in CGI film. In CGI film, say, oh, OK, this shot took 1 day to render. OK, well, you have 1/10 of a second to render this shot. Have fun. So where do we end up within this comparison? Well, demo obviously is about motion. We have motion, so like I said, maybe we should do something about it. It's completely virtual, it's interactive, and we have very small teams. Usually, I mean, I know some groups have a lot of musicians. And important thing, it's low cost. I mean, all you need to do demo is maybe a computer and maybe a couple of equipment, but it's usually low cost. So what can we do about this? Well, the fact that it's motion picture, like I said, you can make a real strong impression over your audience. So you really have some interesting thing you can do with it. The fact that it's virtual, indeed,
it's difficult to come up with things. If you want to make a table, if you need a table, you have to create it. But it also means you can do things that are absolutely impossible or unlikely. To give you an example, I was told that in Kung Fu Panda 2, there is a shot where you see a big crowd with the bad guys and the good guys. So you have just a couple of good guys and many bad guys, and they are fighting in a huge final battle thing. And they wanted the bad guys to look kind of red and the good guys to look kind of gold. And they did this with lighting. Basically, they wanted a different lighting for the good guys and the bad guys. Not really the kind of thing you can do in a real film. If you have a real film with real people, not really fighting, but pretending to really fighting, you're going to have a really hard time doing that. But in CGI, well, you just put a different lighting setup for the good guys and the bad guy, and you're done with it. Well, this is the kind of stuff we can do in demo scene. We can just completely change the thing. We're not bound to the reality, and that's true for camera stuff. Also, in films, you have big cameras, so it's going to be difficult or expensive or just plain impossible to do some kind of stuff. But in CGI, you can do anything you want. The fact that it's not interactive is extremely important. You know, we are always talking about faking things in the demo scene. Well, the reason we can fake things is because we have no interactivity. We have so much control over what the audience is going to see that we can just make things that, you know, for example, this research paper. The one critique that is often made to research paper is that you see some paper with some screenshot and they go like, state of the art is this, and everybody else has this problem. Well, our technique doesn't have it. Our screenshot looks this good. And you're like, wow, that looks good. And you implement it. And, well, you don't quite understand because it doesn't work. And then you realize, yeah, the screenshot is pretty much the only case that works. Well, the cool thing about the demo scene is, well, you can just stick to the screenshot case. And maybe if you just move the camera a pixel away, it will break apart. But you don't care the least about this because the audience is not going to be able to see it. So you can just stage things and fake things and limit yourself to the very narrow case that work, and that would be OK. The fact that you have a small team is extremely important, and other people can be envious about this. It means you don't have, well, you have much less communication issues, and you have much more consistency. Because, well, usually a group, you're going to have, like, say, 1, 2, or maybe 3 coders. You're going to have 1, maybe 2 musicians, and 1 or 2 design, well, a graphic artist. So it means every single person in the group has an influence on a very big and quite clear part of the demo. So people don't stomp on each other too much. So this means you can have a very strong consistency that is much harder to achieve in other media. Well, in media with larger teams. Then the fact that it's low cost means you can experiment. If you want to try something new, well, you just hack it for a couple of hours and you're done with it. You don't have to buy a new computer every time you want to try a new technique, except if you buy a new computer every 5 years, in case, yeah, you might need a new one to try something new. Then other interesting thing is usually demos are pretty short. It's a couple of minutes, so it means you can make a stronger impact. And lastly, well, we are a community, so we can share stuff, and that's really in our best interest to share things and spare people the time. So the question was, well, what can we do about these limitations? Then my answer would be that we can just understand them and take the best out of it. And this is going to be my conclusion today. Thank you. Now I hope you don't have any question, but feel free so. Oh, someone is raising his hand.
What's the name of the book you have mentioned?
It's the first one, Visual Story by Bruce Block. I didn't read all of them, but I was told some are really important, so I put them so you can just refer to them. Like the film art, I think they have the 10th edition or something, so the book is really old. It's a classic. I should buy it. Other question? I guess that's a no. Well, then, thank you. Yes?
Sometimes you're limited with the light count. In the demo scene, doing real-time graphics, you're limited to light count.
Yes.
You didn't mention that. You can't, like you said in the battle scene of the Kung Fu Panda 2,
yeah.
You probably had lots of lights for each set of guys.
Yeah, you certainly
you
cannot
can't have that real time, probably.
Well, that depends.
Just
I mean,
saying.
if you're rendering an object, you can say have 2 lights for it, and you can have 2 different lights for it. So in the end, for the rendering, it feels like you just had 2 lights. It's just not the same light for every object. So unless it really takes a lot of time to set up your light, it's going to be okay. But yeah, well, from my experience, well, 1 light is never enough. 1 light, it looks terrible. But when you have 2 lights, you can have already nice things. So you can just change it for every object.
The most common, I think it's 3 lights.
Yeah, the 3 lights lighting. I didn't mention it, but yeah, especially in portraiture and stuff like that. Okay, I think we're done.